Welcome to the Block Time podcast, produced by Riot Platforms. Today we're in a bit of a different environment than our usual studio up in Round Rock. We are in downtown Austin at the Bitcoin Commons, graciously hosted by Unchained. And today we've got an excellent guest, Steve Lee. Steve, welcome.
Hi. Thanks, Pierre, for having me on.
Steve leads Spiral, which is a part of Block, which is I'll let you describe Block and Spiral.
Sure. Block's a large publicly traded company in the U.S. People are probably familiar with like the Square brand, product for merchants the past 15 years or so, and Cash App's super popular mobile wallet. So that's the two primary businesses of Block. But Block is also, Jack Dorsey's the CEO, a big fan of Bitcoin, and Block's making some bets on various Bitcoin products as well. I lead a group called Spiral. It's a really unique initiative because we're not a commercial endeavor. We're not part of the business of Block. You can think of us more as Team Bitcoin. Block does fund us, but we work on open source software and design work and do some creative content as well. And we're just trying to accelerate the adoption of Bitcoin. So we're you can think of us as Team Bitcoin.
Yeah. You just reminded me with the creative content. I think you were a little humble there. I mean, I thought y'all's video was really funny. And is it going to be recurring?
Well, I actually just dropped off stickers here at Bitcoin Commons. You can have some stickers if you'd like some.
I would love some. Yes.
Well, so there, there'll be. We're also on TikTok, so we're experimenting at Spiral. So we're on TikTok now with Here Comes Bitcoin. So there's there in YouTube Shorts. There's been new content shared, regularly since last fall when that film came out.
Yeah.
If people aren't familiar with what we're talking about, we created a film called Who is Bitcoin? Because most people in the space answer the question, what is Bitcoin or why Bitcoin? But we answered the question, who is Bitcoin? And it's an attempt at just a humorous, more approachable way to learn about Bitcoin for a segment of people who might be turned off or not, or like current methods of marketing maybe don't resonate with them. So this is intended to be very, very lightweight and funny and kind of weird. So we created this large furry orange puppet who has a personality, and he is Bitcoin, and so it's a fun film, and we'd love to see it. We've created emojis and different messaging platforms, and there's digital stickers. So it's been fun, and we hope it becomes popular sort of throughout the community.
Yeah, and the video, if it really gets at this being misunderstood theme, which I think pervades Bitcoin, especially when the price is skyrocketing, because people look at it through the CNBC price chart rather than whether it's the underlying engineering of the system or how I would actually interface it using it. We almost as a culture, and I'm not talking about Bitcoiners specifically because we're here at a hackathon, so there's definitely builders in the Bitcoin culture, but from a wider perspective, we've seen these ETFs just skyrocket in popularity, and when I saw that, it way exceeded my expectations. I thought that they wouldn't be a big deal until there was a bull market. I didn't think that they would cause a bull market. But then my thought was, wow, nobody really wants to use Bitcoin, huh? and then I thought of your video of poor Mr. Bitcoin, continues to be misunderstood.
Yeah, we're going to go through phases, right?
Yeah.
And so, big picture, we're going through a store of value realization phase. I think most people in Bitcoin see that medium of exchange comes later. Or obviously there's I talked about this morning with Matt Odell about he was arguing it's money today, and obviously there's people are using it as money today, whether it's as apps or it's certainly there's early signs of that. But for it to be a broadly accepted payment method is going to take time. It's actually what Spiral primarily works on. So like we're huge believers in the store of value, digital gold narrative. That is a very important part of Bitcoin. Our view on that is like, it's kind of a done deal. Or I mean, like there's product market fit. Bitcoin, like it's not going to lose the pristine store of value in the world, where there's a lot of engineering work is around making it a great digital payments platform.
And where do you think the points of friction have been that have hampered Bitcoin's adoption for payments?
Many.
Yeah.
I still think there are, you can have experiences that are really good user experience, but they're not consistent.
It's like in a lab in a controlled environment. You can have it.
There's
really
even
well.
real world experiences, but I mean they're rare. They tend to be custodial wallets, which there's no shame or harm in custodial wallets. But if that's the only way it's being used, you lose a lot of important properties of Bitcoin. So when you try to use non-custodial mobile wallets, that's where it's even a rarer case of having a good user experience. So there's just a lot of engineering work to improve that, design work. So those are things that are like within the control of Spiral developers and other people in the space, other engineers in the space. But then there's things like regulatory and taxes. So technically, if you spend your Bitcoin today, like even on a coffee or a hamburger or an internet service that costs $9, you need to like figure out the cost basis of that Bitcoin and pay taxes. I mean, not only is that like a financial obligation, but it's like it would be a total nightmare and hassle to like account for that, right? So we really need to see legislation where there's some value, where some like whatever $600 or some if it's under that, you don't have to pay. It's treated as a currency instead of an asset. And it's hard because like, is it an asset? Is it a currency? Is it both? Different regulatory bodies, I think, have different answers to that question. So that's another issue. Then of course, just broad acceptance, right? I mean, like most merchants today don't accept Bitcoin. So it's a network effects game that takes time.
Right.
One last thing. Killer use cases. It needs killer use cases as well. And, remittance, there's good potential there. And maybe certain purchases you make, you want privacy and it can help with that. But, and then there's like innovative stuff for it. Like there is popularity with Zaps. It's a small group, but it's a rabid group of like people here at the Commons, so finding use cases as well. Sorry.
No. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up, only because we recovered this in our last episode, but how does the Lightning Network play into all that stuff that you're mentioning?
Yeah, I think, Lightning Network, developers have been working on it for a number of years now. There's been tremendous hype and excitement around it. The past 6 months or so, there's been increased criticism of it. So, and a lot of that criticism is valid. Like valid feedback. It's not FUD or nonsense. It's valid. So I think, what is Lightning and is it succeeding? Is it gonna succeed? It depends on your expectations. An area where I think it is succeeding and will succeed, and it's gonna be here for it'll be here 10 years from now and 15 years from now, is being the interoperable glue between many other systems. So you could be a Kraken customer, Cash App. You could be using a product that's based on like Fediment or Cashew, these e-cash systems, or there's like new protocols like Arc and state chains and this new technology. You could have users across all these different systems, none of which are compatible with each other, but they are compatible because they can all talk the same language, which is Lightning. So Pierre, you could be on, you could have a Fediment eCash wallet. I might not have ever even heard of it, know anything about it, care about it, but I can still pay you from Cash App or from my non-custodial Lightning wallet through Lightning. So I think that's great product market fit and a slam dunk. Will Lightning scale to 8 billion people on their mobile phone, provide Apple Pay like UX, be near zero fees? We don't know how to do that yet. So, and there's reasons it's reasonable to be skeptical of achieving that. Lightning absolutely scales on-chain Bitcoin. There's zero question about that. How much does it scale is an open question. And right now, it's certainly, no one can make the case that it scales to everyone. And that gets back to the block size limit. but also just on-chain fees. I mean, you definitely can amortize expensive fees across many payments, but we don't really know. I think it also depends on the use case and how you're using your wallet is going to be a function of, or that's going to like heavily factor into how many payments you can get per on-chain transaction. And it can go anywhere from economical to not economical.
Yeah, the on the fees side, it's funny how I've seen this parallel emerge between where Riot is on the electricity markets and on-chain fees, where we see it's not that on-chain fees are always high or always low, it's that they're very volatile. And so if we can shift the time usage of saying, hey, let's have people open and close channels when there's not a lot of network congestion, then we're able to shift on-chain footprint away from those hotspots. But then when fees are expensive on-chain, people are still able to send payments over Lightning. And so we've kind of seen that stress test over the past, let's call it 18 months, because there has been a lot more network congestion. And it was interesting to kind of see the narratives of, oh, it's too expensive to open a channel now versus, oh, but it's really cheap to, send off chain right now. And it's almost like, you're right that it's not FUD, but it was written about in the Lightning white paper that, hey, we're not going to be able to put everything on chain. And I also, this may be unpopular for a lot of folks, but I'm not a self-custody maximalist. And so in the sense that, like, what I see as valuable is the option to self-custody, the ability to do so. I don't think we should have the expectation, because the past is our best guide. Like, Coinbase has been a hugely popular custodian, even before Lightning existed. I onboarded onto Coinbase in like 2013. And when we look at, I think they've got billions of dollars of Bitcoin under custody. Clearly, there's market demand for that. But I think that there's like this vision of, well, we wanted us to all be self-custodial, and anything less than that is a huge disappointment for a particular demographic.
I'd agree. I agree with that. I agree with that, but Spiral focuses a lot on self-custody. And the reason why is because it's not, the kind of work we do, it's not profitable. And we're lucky at Spiral to have this budget given to us by Block, and we can work on whatever we want to work on. So we tend to focus on things that we think are important and high impact for Bitcoin that doesn't have a business model. Because if it has a business model, great, go start a company.
Right.
And so I agree with you on the most important thing is the option to self-custody. But if no one's working on the underlying protocol, infrastructure, design, and keeps the user experience at least reasonable for self-custody, no one's going to use it. If
they lose the option.
They lose the option just because it's like unusable. So that's why we focus on it. But we don't focus on it because we think custodial is bad or no one should use custodial. We just want to make sure that it's a actual viable option. And I think on the policy side too, and regulatory, we as a overall ecosystem need to really make sure that self-custody, it doesn't, so with the ETS, one nice thing of the ETS is that it's really hard for the US to like ban Bitcoin or some like really egregious action. But there's still the risk of like, oh yeah, ETF's good, self-custody bad. So we need to watch it out for that from a regulatory standpoint as well.
Yeah.
I think this brings up another analogy that Pierre had talked about in the last episode, where it's like, self-custodial can be viewed as like a checking account, whereas like a Lightning wallet or something similar could be like you're walking around money that you would have in your leather wallet. That was a good analogy that Pierre brought up. And I think it's important, like you guys mentioned, to have the ability to do both, to have the custodial and the non-custodial side of Bitcoin.
Yep. And I also I hope that we can sort of fulfill let's call it Satoshi's vision, the white paper of like peer-to-peer, like digital cash, right?
Yeah.
And so where it's truly peer-to-peer, it's censorship resistant. I mean, it has the properties of cash that humans have depended on for centuries. That's being lost, even though I think most humans don't realize it's being lost as we move to digital money, because the digital money everyone uses today doesn't have, it has a trusted intermediary, and you have financial surveillance, etc. So I still hope we can achieve that vision, but there's a lot of work to actually realize that. But I also agree with the point, Pierre, that even if we never achieve like every single possible principle of Bitcoin, like Bitcoin has so many positive characteristics to it that even if we realize 7 out of 8, that's still like this massive win for society.
Yeah, it puts a dent in it. And the other part too is what you reminded me of email when you're talking about that we can lose the ability to self-custody if we're not investing into that stack, because like with email, eventually you can't really run your own email server. It's just too complicated. And now you have to use an email provider, and they're going to handle everything for you, but they're also going to read all your emails. And so and I think maybe this is the criticism of Lightning, is that it's too high maintenance, right? That, you got this channel management. We were promised autopilot, you won't have to manage your own channels. That's still in the works. And so do you think that the people who are looking at Lightning of, hey, this is going to be the self-custody solution for the average person, that's kind of, that there might be other technologies that come about? And we've heard some, people theorize about what those might look like, that to scale UTXOs essentially, so that you can have people sending on-chain payments, transactions without Lightning, or without having to manage their channels. Do you think that's more science fiction, or that there are promising avenues of research there?
I think there's promising avenues of research. Since the beginning of this year, Spiral, we've started allocating quality time every week to start studying some of the more recent proposals. So we've been looking at several of the covenant proposals, and there's a proposal by John Law called Timeout trees, which helps scale Lightning. And for 2 years now, Spiral's been funding Fediment, and sort of we believed in that. And I think Cashew is also super interesting as eCash. So we're looking at all these different things. I guess my summary is something like this proposal Timeout trees. It scales Lightning even more. The benefits of it solves some of the problems of Lightning, like to onboard a new user. There can be like thousands of users in one. It's sharing basically a UTXO among as many users as you want, pretty much, like 1,000 or even like 1,000,000 in theory. So you do one on-chain transaction, you create this what's called a timeout tree. You would be like an LSP or a funder of this channel. Then you can have all these users. They can do Lightning payments, and it basically no cost to onboard, because there's just the one on-chain transaction for all these users. That timeout tree lasts for only a certain period of time, say 3 months, because there needs to be some escape hatch so that the provider can get their money out at some point. So let's call it 3 months. So at the end of 3 months, everyone has to exit, or else the provider can take their money. So in the happy path case, the exit is to just do a Lightning payment into a new timeout tree. You just keep repeating that process. You basically roll over into timeout trees. So in the happy path case, you get pretty much infinite scaling for new users at very, very, very low cost, and they can do Lightning payments to their heart's content forever. That's the happy path. But what if the provider goes offline, they have technical problems and they're not available? Or what if they steal?
Yeah.
Like they go offline because they want to steal. What do? So the protocol does have a unilateral exit option like Lightning. That's good. So now let's get, okay, this sounds incredible. Why don't we do this? One, it requires CTV or some covenant change. So it requires a consensus change. But even if that's the case, then like I think a lot of people would be like, let's do a consensus change. It would rally support for that. The other gotcha is if you're the first person in the tree to want to exit unilaterally, the number of on-chain transactions that are required to do that is order log n of the number, where n is the number of people in that tree.
Oh wow!
So if there's a million, so if there's a million people, you're broadcasting a lot of transactions. So if you were worried about the cost of Lightning and having to pay $20 or whatever to close out a channel, now you're spending $200 or $2,000. So how non-custodial is this, right? If it costs you $200 to unilaterally exit, then any money, any balance in your wallet below 200, is not non-custodial. So only the balance above that threshold would truly be self-sovereign. That's the big gotcha. But there's exploration, and I'm still learning. So where I'm poking around is like, can we share fees across users? Because in the case of like someone cheating, and first of all, this only works if that's very rare, right? And but in the rare case that the LSP is cheating and trying to steal, obviously everyone wants to get out. So while the cost for the first user exiting is very high, and the last user, it dissipates. So the last user is much cheaper. So if you can share the fees across everyone, that makes it more manageable. And then Z-Man, open source protocol developer, has posted some thoughts around like fee insurance. And I think that's an interesting space to, I'm interested in learning more about that. And I think a lot of Bitcoiners should. Is there a way to like pay an insurance so that you're paying sort of a fixed amount all the time, but it's tiny? Again, if you can assume that these theft attempts will be very, very rare, so you're never hit with this gotcha of like too expensive of a bill.
Interesting. Yeah, my mind goes towards mutually assured destruction, right? Of, maybe the punishment should be that the Bitcoin just get destroyed and nobody gets any Bitcoin for that. But that doesn't. That's probably puts a ceiling on how much value people want to put in that, which might be okay for this use case, right? Yeah. I think that this is really where people, especially policymakers, need to understand that this is open source software. And so it's not just the case that we're looking at what Bitcoin was in 2009 or what it is in 2024, but really it's like, what can it be in 2030, in 2040, in 2050? And that roadmap is not set by a CEO and an executive team. It's set by anyone who wants to contribute to it.
Exactly. Well, and I'm talking about this Timeout trees. It's by John Law, who I don't know who that person is, and it's probably a NIM. Like, so it could be you, Pierre.
It sounds like the most democratic idea for a monetary system to ever exist. I think it is.
Yeah.
And there's just I won't go and belabor all these, but there's ARC proposal, state chains, the different eCash systems. All of these were, some of them are inspired by technology from like decades ago, but all of these were like proposed by just various developers in the space. Some of them have companies pushing them, some don't. Yeah. It's super healthy. And then there's a lot of activity around zero knowledge proof technology and optimistic rollups, and like Robin Linus, who's a Spiral grantee, he published the BitVM white paper last year, which is interesting because it has interesting properties and it doesn't require a consensus change to Bitcoin. I think that's the most compelling thing about it. Yeah. There's still a lot of unanswered questions about that technology, like what's the actual on-chain data footprint? I don't know the answers to that, and it could be unwieldy. Hopefully not. But the level of activity of R&D is seems to me like at an all-time high, which is very encouraging.
And do you think that Taproot has, from my perspective, it seems like we're still scratching the surface on kind of that area. Have you heard of folks like digging into what Taproot unlocks and kind of what's some of the next steps there are?
I mean, well, it's been 5 years since you and I were like championing
Yeah.
it. So, well, one piece of good news is that Coinbase finally supports, or I think they're in the midst of adding support for sending to BEC32M, which is the new address format that you need if you want to receive to a Taproot address. So I know for a fact that like Block's new BitKey wallet product, when they first started designing that, there was a desire to only support Taproot addresses. Because if you only support Taproot, you can use technologies like Frost, and they could have done some really cool, you could like lose one of your keys of your 203 wallet and replace it without an on-chain transaction, which is amazing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, it's like technically super cool, but it also saves you that on-chain fee, which if it's 20, I mean, if it's 20 or 50 bucks, that's a lot of money if you lose your phone or something. So, but they weren't able to because you wouldn't have been, if you had coins on Coinbase, you wouldn't be able to send it to a wallet, and that's just sort of a showstopper. So by Coinbase unlocking that, I think we're going to see more wallets now default to Taproot addresses, exclusively use Taproot addresses. So I think that will help. It's going to, and also with fees rising, the fee savings you get, especially on multi-sig wallets, so we're going to see more multi-sig wallets with fees rising. We're going to see more demand for Taproot. So, and Lightning implementations are adding it as well.
Right.
So it's one of these things that takes years and years and years to get adoption because again, there's no CEO that can just say, this is a 2024 priority. We're going to support it. There can be a CEO that says that, but it's just for their product, right? And there's like many implementations, many wallets. And so it's going to take years, but I remain as bullish as I was then. Although it depends on, again, kind of like Lightning, what's your expectation? I mean, I recall some people like claiming Taproot was going to offer like Ethereum, like smart contract functionality. And it's like, no.
Well,
that was like,
I don't know. I still think it is going to. To me, we're much earlier in the sense that we're, the multi-sig protocols that use Taproot are still being developed.
Yeah.
And so I've been waiting for the M of N, true multi-sig with 1,000 participants. We're not quite there yet. We could be though, right? Like it's just a matter of getting the cryptography right.
Exactly. And that's where like Music 2 has taken a long time to get a cryptography proof and be confident in it. And Frost is, and now we are there with Music 2. And Frost is not far behind. So for the audience, if you don't know what these terms are, Music 2 allows like an N of N wallet, 2 of 2, 10 of 10, whatever. And Frost lets you do threshold signatures, so 2 of 3, 3 of 5, or 1 of 10,000, or crazy configurations. So I'm confident that's going to happen. It's just you got to be patient.
Yeah, I foresee an app that legislators will have, and so then they can actually control they got the power of the purse. Why are they not just voting by doing a multi-sig instead of telling Treasury to do something and then Treasury doing something else, right? So I think eventually we'll get everyone onto Bitcoin, including legislators who are voting with their multi-sig wallets. But on the Lightning side, I mean, that's critical because every Lightning channel is a multi-sig. And so that's just an immediate cost saving and scaling up essentially.
Yeah, I mean, there's at least 3 known things that can reduce fees for Lightning. Taproot is one. Simply just reduces the size of the transaction, so it's less fees. Splicing is another, which one of the Lightning implementations, Eclair supports it, and their corresponding wallet, Phoenix, already is live with that. And the other Lightning implementations are actively adding it. But splicing will also reduce fees. And then another is actually you already mentioned it, which is sort of a time preference. So like if you're willing to be patient with your channel openings, you can wait for a lower fee environment. Or there are applications where you have a zero conf like just in time channel in which there's a window of time in which there's some trust, and that window of time can be adjusted as well. So like if, and it all depends on the fee rate, right? So if I'm opening a channel and I can immediately use it because I'm trusting the zero conf, how quickly that transaction gets mined is a function of the fee rate. So if you want to save money, spend less fees, but it might take a day, 2 days, or a week to mine. But that's another lever. There's a trade-off.
That's interesting. Now, I want to go back to your point about smart contracts and Taproot, because this is something that I was looking at Kraken when we were implementing Lightning. People were like, hey, why don't you look at the other layer twos? So I look at Arbitrum, and they are putting all of the data on chain and then doing the verification off chain, which is kind of the opposite of the Bitcoin ethos of, hey, let's do a tiny verification on chain and then let's have all the data be off chain. And then also that, I was like, all right, how do I run an Arbitrum node? And they're like, no, you don't. There's one sequencer. So there's one node, and you're going to send all your transactions to that node, and they'll do all this for you. And I thought to myself, like, well, we're really talking about two very different things. Like we're calling these L2s, but they're very, like, Arbitrum's more of, I don't want to start casting aspersions on people, but that's where I thought, well, okay, so with Taproot, we're going to do all of this off chain, right? And we've seen proposals from Lightning Labs, for example, with Taro, and then Ordinals came out, and they were like, well, we're going to put all of this data on chain. And then I was having like flashbacks to Arbitrum. I was like, okay, so why can't they just have their own execution environment? And then I start looking at the Ordinals client, and I'm like, oh, okay, Ordinals is essentially Arbitrum. That you've got this client that has its own consensus rules, right? Its own execution environment, completely separate from Bitcoin's rules. And then Bitcoin's just this data layer, and they're competing against other transactional uses of Bitcoin, but it seems like they essentially, what Vitalik went out to do with Ethereum, because he felt limited by op return, was now being done on Bitcoin. I thought to myself, like, well, maybe Vitalik should come back to Bitcoin or something. But it seems like it's very like time is a circle, and that we just are going to keep reinventing things of, hey, let's do this part off chain. Oh, it doesn't work so well to do it off chain. Let's do it on chain, but let's do this other part off chain. And we're just swapping out. The trade-offs.
Right. And the reason to put it on chain is data availability, right? And in the NFT case, it's like a big win by doing it the way they're doing it on Bitcoin versus what we saw a few years ago on Ethereum. Is like all you had then is with Ethereum, or the solutions that I'm aware of a few years ago, is you had like a URL to some server, or at best like IPFS or something, but even that didn't guarantee you that it was going to be durable, where the Bitcoin blockchain is the ultimate in durability. It's going to always be there. Of course, the cost is it takes up space, and it increases the cost of running nodes. So that's the trade-off, right? And same with any kind of like roll-ups technology or sidechain or anything you do in some other system with totally different rules. If you can just validate it and have a very small footprint on Bitcoin and get some benefit from that, but if you also put the data on Bitcoin, you get benefit to that too, with cost.
Well, when this was brought up with the Ethereum people of like, hey, you guys just have pointers to JPEGs on a website, and they're like, yeah, but we used to have it on chain, but then it got too expensive. And so, this is, I think, is critical for folks on the outside who are trying to understand, okay, there's no CEO. How do you know what direction to go in? I think maybe the principle is always about, are there any upgrades where it's a strict improvement and that we're not actually subtracting from any of the other properties of Bitcoin? And that's the direction we go in. And then anything else is just going to be mired in people arguing with each other because people have different interests.
Yeah. There's a lot of gray area too, though, right? Like if there's if there's some, if there's a bug where all of a sudden you can create billions of Bitcoin, well, there's going to be quick consensus to let's fix that bug, right? I mean, it's in no one's interest to have that bug. So something like that is obvious. There'd be an immediate reaction, and there wouldn't be drama around that. I would not expect. But
except for the one guy who got the Bitcoin. Yeah. He's like, no, we don't need to upgrade. What are you talking about?
He'll be on his own fork.
Yes.
But something, some of the covenant proposal, like OPCTV and OPCAT are two things that I think one could argue that they're just
additive,
and they don't. But then there's always the what if, or like especially OPCAT. I mean, something the more expressive in general it is, it's like, well, then what bad thing have we not thought of yet? Some adversarial scenario have we not thought of yet that is going to bite us later, and like it's basically impossible to roll it back once it's activated. So that's always going to be the tension there with changes, and obviously the more Bitcoin grows, the harder it's going to get to make changes. There's just more people, more companies, more dollars, Bitcoin economics value. So it's gonna only get harder. But I remain. My own view. I'm definitely not an ossifier. I think Bitcoin, can and should change, but I'm relatively conservative about how we should go about it. And gaining consensus is a really, like, how do you gain consensus? None of us really know, because there's not like a blueprint. There's not like here's steps 1 through 7, just follow those. And in fact, I think that's almost dangerous if such steps got created, because then you could like game them and attack them. And
right.
So I think it's actually healthy. Like I actually love the governance of Bitcoin, and that it's like completely chaotic, no blueprint. You and I don't really know how to go about it. But I think there's things we do know. There's things like there's a do not do list and there's a do list. I mean, there are there's best practices. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So, trying, early on, you need to win over developers. It needs to be like technically sound and like implemented and tested, and that needs to be there. Otherwise, obviously it's a non-starter. And to win over developer consensus, you need to listen to feedback. And I think it helps if you have like co-authors to the proposal. So it's less of a Pierre's change or Steve's change, but it's a community change.
Right.
And Pierre, Steve, and Gabe all co-authored this, and we don't all work for the same company or whatever, right? I mean,
got to set our egos aside.
And that's a big challenge, right? Because often the sharpest developers who come up with some of the most genius creative things might have an ego. So finding a developer who's really creative and innovative, technically sound, and egoless, that's hard to find. And I think we've had that in the past with some developers who have gotten consensus changes in, and hopefully we see more and more developers adopt that in the future. But once you have developer consensus, then that's seems to me like when you need to go broader and like communicate this to the broader Bitcoin community. And there at least shouldn't be questions then about like, is this going to blow up? Or there should, it's totally healthy to ask questions.
Yeah, there can be the questions, but there will be answers.
But hopefully there's answers to those questions. Right. I mean, in fact, I should say, there definitely should be questions. Is it going to blow up again? Everyone should be asking that. But hopefully there's solid answers. But then it still comes down to like, is it a big enough benefit? Does it benefit enough users? And then it's going to get, some people might just be like, I don't care about that, but I'm not going to like waste a lot of my energy fighting it. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it's not like there's not just two. It's not just yes or no, or like I'm in favor or I'm not. You can also abstain.
Right. On the developers point, I think that a lot of people outside the industry see developers as like a fungible commodity of code monkeys to to caricature that perspective. But it seems like within Bitcoin, not only do you have to know how to write code, but you have to know cryptography, kind of some of the maths behind that. If you're going in that direction of wanting to contribute to kind of the consensus part of the system, and then you have to know C++ on a very deep level because that's just what it's written in, and there's some sharp edges there that the reviewers will point out for you. But it'd be good to. But the other piece of it is that you're working out in the open. And I think that there's a lot of enterprise developers who they like working on like internal tools for their company. And then there's some that like to work for, public things. But sometimes fairly or unfairly, there's a spotlight put on a developer or some work that's been going on in Bitcoin Core or other open source Bitcoin projects. And in particular, as we mentioned, because there's so much value riding on it, that sometimes I find like unreasonable public demands put onto the developers. But basically, I mean, it feels like there's only so many folks who have the combination of soft skills and technical skills to take on these roles and then to help strengthen Bitcoin.
Well, that I agree, and it also gets back to like it would be advised to have like multiple people involved, right? So you could have multiple developers involved in like writing the spec and proposal, writing the code and the tests, and then also either other developers or even non-developers who can help champion and communicate, and also deal with feedback.
Yeah.
In whatever form that feedback comes, which can be aggressive. Because a lot of developers, they just want to be technical. They just want to code. They don't want to like be a PR comms specialist as well. Or
deal with feedback.
Yeah. I mean, in Bitcoin, it can be harsh, right?
Of course.
And that's fine. Again, there should be feedback, but So I think having more people involved can help. And also kind of a time and a place. Like if there's a developer who's just like totally in R&D mode, like super early research, and not in any way suggesting it's ready to change Bitcoin, like just allow that person to
let them cook.
But once you get to the stage where it's like, okay, like, they think it's ready and it should be activated. Well, then obviously it requires a lot more scrutiny then and buy-in and consensus.
Yeah. I just remembered there was a trade-off, or I'm sure there's more than one, but with Taproot, which was about privacy, that, hey, we're adding another address type, and so now there's another way to differentiate and fingerprint, wallets and whatnot. And I remember the person offering this feedback was somebody who was very critical of Bitcoin Core, et cetera. And I thought to myself, well, they've got a valid point. It still doesn't change my judgment on this. We'll get everyone on Taproot addresses eventually. 5 years later, we got Coinbase joining. And so in a way, it's kind of like there's feedback that is valid, that is coming from people we don't like, and they're doing it in a way that we don't like, but somehow we have to remove that part and just focus on, okay, how can we improve privacy in Bitcoin? Yeah. But that's not easy. Okay, so changing gears, I know that Spiral has been at the forefront of a lot of different investments in the open source area, whether it's LDK or BDK. Do you want to get into what do you see as like the top investments that Spiral has been making and is continuing to make? Let's
sure.
dig in.
And also, just to be clear, investments in the sense, we're not taking like equity in companies.
Right. Yes.
These are grants and all open source work. So again, we have this like magical money where we don't have to get a direct return on it, right? So, but where are we? Which projects are we investing in? Certainly, you have to start with LDK because we have a full-time team of 7 developers dedicated to LDK. So that's a substantial investment. And LDK is getting really strong adoption from a lot of different types of use cases too. You have Cash App was one of the first adopters. That's a custodial wallet where they're running LDK on a server. So technically, it's relatively easy compared to some of the other applications. Another example is Lightspark is a user of LDK, and Lightspark uses both LND and LDK. But where they use LDK is where they need a lot of scaling. So they want to be able to support with their clients non-custodial, where their clients hold the keys, but they want to run the node on Lightspark servers. And so they might be running, if they grow and are successful, like hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of instances of a Lightning node, and LDK is lightweight enough and customizable enough to allow them to do that. Lexi is a startup, L-E-X-E, that is using LDK on a server, but in an enterprise HSM.
Oh, wow. Which
is technically super interesting. And what does that mean? It's different than every other Lightning implementation I know, because the keys are in the cloud. They don't have to be on your phone or on a client device. They don't have to be in a browser, but it's non-custodial in the sense that the company behind it, Lexi, doesn't have access to the keys in that HSM. It also allows for like offline receive, because the keys are in this HSM that always has an internet connection. It matches Lightning's requirements nicely of needing to always be online. So that's interesting. And then of course there's BitKit and Mutiny, which are mobile wallets, which are using LDK to run a Lightning node on your phone and be self-sovereign with a Lightning wallet on your phone. So there's many different, like another one, C equals is an LSP that's running LDK. So all these things I just mentioned are each a different application of LDK. So we're really happy with the adoption of LDK. But our grant program doesn't, or we haven't, at least to date, given grants for LDK. We give grants to like a dozen other projects in this space. You mentioned BDK, Bitcoin Development Kit. It's just like LDK, except for layer 1 on-chain Bitcoin. So if you want to build a Bitcoin wallet, you can use this library. It has a bunch of stuff that you don't have to roll your own. You can just use their libraries. Stratum V2 is a project we supported for over 3 years now. And this is a new mining protocol. As the name implies, it's V2. Stratum V1 came about like over a decade ago, I think, and it's what the industry has used for over a decade. As one might guess, V2 has some enhancements and improvements, and also after 10 years, there's probably room for enhancement and improvements. There's improvements on like encryption and security, but the most important one, I think, to broader Bitcoin base is around decentralization. Today, with Stratum V1, the only actors that can select transactions when mining are pools and not miners themselves, unless they're self-mining. But right. All miners using a pool, which are most miners, the miners don't select the transactions. So with Stratum V2, it actually creates an infrastructure that allows the miners to select the transaction. So the pool still can, the miners can, and technically anyone can. A third party even could. So it's very flexible. So I'm super excited that in fact, I think that project. So there's an open source reference implementation of this protocol that we've been helping funding, but Galaxy's been involved in Foundry and many other mining companies, and Riot is doing some testing, and so we are that project is on the verge, like within days of a 1.0, like actual software that I would still test really well.
That's
before you put your whole farm on it. I would do some testing, but this is the year where it should finally, you could actually do real hash rate on it. So hopefully we see real hash rate this year, and then over the ensuing years, as people get comfortable with it, it gets proven, and you're not losing profitability. It's proven out, and then we'll get full adoption, and that'll be really strong and healthy.
Yeah, I mean, it's been exciting to try it out. It works. It works for us. I think that there's, on the mining pool side, two things. There's the policy question of transaction selection, because we see this come up in debates about whether how much should Bitcoin, let's call them transaction selectors. How much should they be driven by fee maximization? And that actually is a very complicated topic itself, is how do you maximize fees in a 4 million weight unit block? Lots of active research happening there, mempool policy. ancestors, descendants, things that are, we rely on.
One of the most active projects in the Bitcoin Core project right now is rethinking that.
Rely on the brilliant minds there I think the political side, it's about, okay, if I don't like this person and this address, how do I get all of the transaction selectors to not select any transactions associated with this address so they don't include it, in the ledger? And that's where I think that there's like probably a lot more political debate, a lot less technical debate, because on the technical side, it's kind of just cut and dry of, well, do you have the address? We know how to filter things, right? But the technical side would just say that's fruitless because somebody else is going to include it anyway. There's no way you're going to be able to fork Bitcoin to like filter these addresses, but it seems like it's a very circular conversation. I don't know if you've gotten into these.
Well, there's
debates.
two levels too. I mean, there's like of what regulatory pressure could look like. There could be regulators could say, here's a list, and you as like an American company or whatever cannot mine any transaction that pays to or from like these addresses or whatever. That's bad, but not devastating for the reason you just said, because some other miner somewhere in the world will include that transaction, and the only cost is a little bit of a delay or maybe a little bit more fees or something. The devastating one would be if regulators said you can't mine a block with this transaction and you can't mine on top of a block that has that transaction. Because then that would, I mean, I think like if that happened in the US, then I think all miners would have to exit the US.
Yeah, you're banning Bitcoin mining in the US. Yeah. And not just Bitcoin mining, right? Because if you're operating a Bitcoin node in the US and you're processing this block with these bad transactions.
Well, that's the infrastructure bill from, was it 2021, I think, has dangerous legislation in it, because if broadly interpreted and interpreted in a certain way by regulators, it can create policy that makes running a node, doing mining or lightning, any of these things effectively illegal, because you would have to report to the IRS like every transactor through those nodes, and you obviously don't have the KYC data. Right. You meaning anyone running these nodes.
Yeah. And then we see on the Ethereum side, Tornado Cash, where, well, maybe it won't be so complicated. They'll just put the Bitcoin network itself on the sanctions list, and then nobody will be allowed to access the Bitcoin network. And there's no question about, are you building on top of the block or not? But that's where it's like, okay, we're not, as in the United States, I don't think that we're going to be able to develop a software solution to what is a political question, and that essentially we have to defend ourselves with political arguments of why this is a bad idea, why you're not going to get the policy outcome that they want, which I think, to me, that's a slam dunk argument of, well, you're just going to drive all of this abroad. And that's what we've seen in the past, is that when they try to stop people from doing things in the US, then it just goes abroad. And then you get FTX, right? Like, you just get a worse outcome abroad than here in the US. But the on the transaction selection, I think that there's now a third debate that is emerging between, okay, profit maximizing, sanctions, and then ordinals, right? Of, okay, what are the correct use cases? And then there, even if my node is filtering out my mempool, you can go directly to a transaction selector and propose your transaction without ever having to go through any of the peer-to-peer network.
That's right. So I think it's important for Bitcoin community to be aware of, learn about. There are some risks with this, and it's important to separate. I mean, there's the debate where there's a lot of drama about, like, are ordinals good or bad or whatever. Is your use case good or bad? And I don't like it, I'm going to filter it out. That I'm not really interested in talking about that. I mean, generally I'm free market. Anyone can do what they want, and if it's dumb, the idea will die.
Right.
But where I think everyone really needs to understand and appreciate there are some transactions that are consensus valid that could cause denial of service attacks or cause security concerns for the network. And those are ones we need to be cautious of miners being oblivious to that or not understanding the ramifications. So there's consensus valid transactions, and then Bitcoin Core has a policy around standard and non-standard transactions. And how is this not censorship? Well, the ones that are defined by Bitcoin Core, at least most of them, I think op return is the one that's maybe more debatable, but the others are strictly there to prevent DOS and security attacks. So as an example, there are consensus valid transactions you can create that use certain opcodes that can cause validation times to exponentially increase. And so while today miners, nodes, your Raspberry Pi can validate a block extremely quickly, I don't know how fast, but like a second or less than a second, like very, very fast. A malicious actor could create a block which can take 30 minutes to validate. Well, that would be very, very disruptive on the network, since on average a block is mined every 10 minutes. So wallets would fall behind. It would create significant centralization pressure on miners, because if you just mine the last block, you have an enormous advantage over all other miners, because you can start mining the next block immediately, and the other miners are spending 10 plus minutes validating that block,
or worse,
or it's
not validating,
or it's not even being, it's like delayed at being relayed, because it gets validated on each hop. So so that's why Bitcoin Core has these policies and defines a standard, and so it doesn't relay non-standard transactions. But these, some of the emerging, or the risk is that a transaction selector service or product would allow any non-standard transaction, and then a malicious actor could actually carry out that attack. So it's important to not allow that, and there's sound reasons behind it, not like trying to censor anyone's use case, and separating that out from some of the BRC20 and these different mechanisms, or they need non-standard transactions right now. So I think it's important teasing those two things out, and that miners or anyone it's not just miners, but anyone operating one of those services has a deep appreciation for that.
Yeah, I think even the block size limit was really put in place for the denial of service attack vector and kind of mitigating it before Satoshi left in 2010.
Yeah, imagine if we had gigabyte blocks right now, they'd be filled up with data, someone's data.
Yeah.
If it's so no matter how big the blocks are, they're always going to be filled up, because if people aren't filling it up, the fees are going to basically be zero or some minimum amount. And
then you're streaming Netflix by stuffing blocks with
That's the challenge there. But anyway, I think that's important to consider. And then another thing the Bitcoin community should be paying attention to is that these transaction accelerator services could be, if very successful, could become centralization choke points. What we don't want is for the mining industry, to be a miner, we want to preserve that it's permissionless, and we don't want it to be permissioned. But imagine a world where there's a couple popular transaction accelerators, popular meaning a substantial portion of Bitcoin transactions exclusively go through them. So you can't just run the Bitcoin software and see all the transactions in your mempool. For you to be a competitive miner, you have to go sign a legal agreement in partnership with a couple other companies to actually be competitive. That's a dangerous world. Now, we've had transaction accelerators for over a decade. So if they're small volume, then it's whatever. But we just need to monitor, is that increasing in percentage of transactions, in percentage of fee rate,
and in percentage of total reward, which it does increase with every halving, that the
Yep.
transaction fees are increasingly important.
Yeah, so both the new use cases around ordinals and the current demand for that, plus the having both make this increase the risk.
And we'd like to think that like Bitcoin never changes, but just endogenously on its own, it is changing and it's evolving. Without any code, there are big code changes happening, but even if we were to imagine there's no code changes happening, it is still changing from an economic perspective.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating. Yeah. So any parting thoughts before we adjourn? It's been very long since we last caught up, Steve.
Yeah, really good to catch up with you. No, I mean, I guess for since the Riot podcast mining, I'm excited about Stratum V2. Really looking forward to that being rolled out over the coming years. I think it's an important tool. Yeah, I mean, I think you guys focus a lot on the energy side and things like that too. That's another. I see that narrative improving over time, so that makes me happy.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time 3 years ago, like talking about that, but kind of got frustrated with people who don't want to actually have an honest conversation about it. But I'm happy to see reality sort of playing out as a lot of us thought even back then. So thanks for doing your part in that.
Yeah, of course. It's gotten me to be looking at what government's doing more. And I thought of you and Spiral recently because the White House came out and said, we need, people need to start using programming languages that are more secure. And so they were like, no more C or C++. Everyone has to do things in Rust.
Yeah. Biden approves Rust.
Yes. So I thought that was very fun.
Spiral is validated for doing so much Rust work.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the projects we don't require Rust, but it turns out a lot of the projects we support are Rust based. So I'm glad the president is on board.
Yeah, seal of approval. Yes. LDK is the new national standard. Yeah, thanks for coming on, and we'll do this again soon.
Yeah, thanks so much.